So you want to pull YINLIN but you're confused if she will fit in your team? In this video I'll go over YINLIN's kit as a free-to-play critic and I'll be brutally honest about my opinions on her. So if you're planning to pull YINLIN for the two big reasons, stick around because this video got some important stuff you need to know before you do so. So right at the beginning I'd like to make one thing clear. YINLIN is a sub DPS and a buff unit. She's not a main DPS, and if you want to make her a DPS, well, I got news for you, buddy. I'll talk about this later after we go over her kit, which I'll try to explain in the most razor language possible. Her basic attack is just a bunch of strings flying around. It has a pretty good range and it can hit enemies from really far away. Although that also means half of the time you will be using your attacks and the game will just randomly target someone 100 yards away from you rather than the enemy in front of your face. Well, that's totally a whole separate issue. Well, that aside, her basic attacks are a little slow and they also have a lot of animations baked into them, and they leave you vulnerable at many stages. Her skill has two parts. First, she'll throw her doll, deal a little damage, then you can use it again. Now she'll slam the doll down in the ground and do a bigger AoE damage. This hit has a higher multiplier and a bigger AoE effect. Her hits from normal attacks, skill and intro will put Sinner's Mark on the enemy. It's a red glowy orb kind of thing on the enemy, pretty easy to miss in fast fights, so keep an eye out on that. Once her forte is up, you hold her basic attack and she does a pretty big AoE. This will convert the Sinner's Mark to Punishment Mark. You definitely want to make sure you have the Sinner's Mark on the enemy before you use this, because getting that Punishment Mark is absolutely important. That Punishment Mark is basically free damage. Now every single time any character in your party attacks the enemy with a Punishment Mark, all the enemies that are affected by the Punishment Mark will take damage. So that's basically free DPS, and that's what makes her really good as a sub DPS. Her ultimate is just multiple ticks of damage. This attack doesn't have a lot of AoE, so you want to make sure you're hugging the enemy before you use this. Her main bread and butter though is the outro that will boost resonance liberation damage as well as electro damage bonus of the next unit. This outro itself is a huge boost in damage and makes her a pretty safe and future proof choice. Her overall gameplay and rotation will involve her using her skill first and then using her second stage of the skill ASAP. These skills take a long time to deploy because of the animations, so you want to get them done as soon as you can. Just spam the skill button and it will just use both the stages at once. Now if you want to use YINLIN, you'll need to get that Punishment Mark on enemy as soon as you can. If you're starting at 0 forte, this can be a little difficult to do against tough enemies. Her charge attacks generate more forte than her basic attacks. After using her skills, you will be at around half of her forte circuit. Then you want to spam a few charge attacks. The charge attacks are relatively fast and you want to dash cancel their animations every time to make them even faster. Your forte should ideally be up within 6 to 8 seconds of on-field time, after which you pop your heavy attack, ultimate, then quickly swap to your DPS. You can swap characters during her heavy attack, so you want to switch to the next character ASAP because her heavy attack makes her vulnerable to enemy damage. Now, problems with her kit. Right off the bat, if you have noticed, there are a few issues with her kit here. First, her attacks are very slow. They leave multiple windows for enemies to attack you and leave you in vulnerable spots. You are completely vulnerable during her forte heavy attack, and also after using her ultimate, she is vulnerable for like a second because she gets up from a sitting to standing pose. So this is a huge reason why you probably wouldn't want to use her for a long duration and switch out as soon as you can. Additionally, look at her skill multipliers. They're not really tailored for a DPS. For comparison, these are the numbers of a DPS like Calcaro. The difference in numbers is pretty huge once you start using these two characters side by side and compare them. Her C1 fixes this issue as it boosts her skill damage by a flat 70%. That's a huge buff to DPS, which will make you hit much more consistent numbers on a skill. Her heavy attack and liberation have decent numbers, so those aren't an issue. Her main problem being an on-field DPS is her clunky moveset, which leaves her vulnerable in multiple ways. This is why a quick swap team is preferred if you want to avoid being hit by enemies every time. Now, as my opinion as a free-to-play player, it's pretty tough to build her. Her free-to-play craftable options, the Rectified 25, doesn't really fit her kit well. The energy regen stat is good only if you're using her again as a sub DPS and not as a main DPS. The Jinjo Keeper also isn't great for her as the passive doesn't do much for her kit. You're stuck with either the standard 5-star rectifier or her signature 5-star weapon. This is my YINLIN rocking the Jinjo Keeper, and I just started farming echoes, so this can definitely be better. But as free to play, I can definitely see getting the 60-200 crit ratio will be pretty tough on her. Her outro works wonders though if you are running a Calcaro with her. Honestly, Calcaro is your best bet for her team. If you don't have Calcaro, I suggest getting him from the standard guaranteed banner, because without Calcaro you'll literally be missing out on half of her buff, which increases electro damage. If you're pulling a character, you'll want to use all of their kit, right? The Resonance Liberation buff is a sweet addition too, but honestly Jianshin gives a much bigger Resonance Liberation buff, so I wouldn't solely pull her for that. However, that buff does work with Resonance Liberation scaling characters like Havoc Rover, so if you don't have Jianshin and you're trying to fit Yinlin in a team, then yeah, you can make her work. Overall, her pros and cons are as follows. Pros: she's probably one of the best looking waifus I've seen in any gacha game so far. Definitely an S tier design. Her outro works wonders with Calcaro, and it will also work with other Resonance Liberation characters, so that gives her good team flexibility. If you have Calcaro, pulling her basically gives you an end game ready team, which will benefit your account greatly. She's a buff character, so she will stay relevant longer than most DPS characters that get power cut pretty early. Her lightning damage buff makes her a staple for all lightning teams, and as more lightning characters are released in the future, having her will become more and more important. So she's a very future-proof character and a safe investment. Her cons are as follows. Her attacks are slow and leave you vulnerable, making it difficult to use her on the field longer. This makes it difficult for me to recommend using her as your main DPS. Her skill multipliers are pretty low and are reliant on her C1 and limited weapon to deal good damage. This makes her difficult to build as a free-to-play player and almost impossible to use her as a main DPS. Her buff, while being very good, can only be utilized fully by Calcaro as of now. So unless they make more lightning characters in the near future, you don't have a lot of places for her to shine right now in the current patch. So as a free-to-play player, if you aren't heavily invested in her design or don't have a Calcaro, I cannot say she's a must-pull for you. However, she is also a very future-proof character and will make your account ready for future lightning characters. So if you feel like getting a main DPS right now isn't important for you and you can afford to skip the future 1.1 DPS characters like Changli and Jinshi, then go for Yinlin. She is a very solid buff character and will stay future-proof for a long time. However, if you need a DPS character right now, she will unfortunately not fit in that role if you're going that free-to-play route. You will need at least her signature weapon to make her shine. That will be my hot take on Yinlin. Personally, I love her design and I had a Calcaro build already, so getting her was a no-brainer for me. Let me know in the comments, will you pull for her? Like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.